For the longest time, I thought the silence in my house was just the way things were supposed to be. You raise your children, you love them, you give them everything you have. And then, one day, you find yourself sitting at a kitchen table for one, looking at a phone that just won't ring. My name is Alina. I'm 78 years old, and for the past 3 years, I have been the loneliest woman in a town full of families. I had 3 children, and through them, 6 beautiful grandchildren. But somewhere along the way, between the birthday parties I wasn't invited to and the holiday dinners I spent with a frozen dinner for one, the connection just frayed. I used to blame myself, I thought maybe I was becoming boring or difficult. The texts would come maybe once a month. Hi, Grandma, sorry, been so busy. Can't make it this weekend, the kids have soccer. Maybe next month, but next month never came. I would hold my phone in my hand at night, looking at the screen, waiting for a notification that never arrived. I'd scroll through pictures of my grandchildren on social media, pictures I wasn't in, milestones I was missing. Proms, graduations, little league games. I was a ghost. A person who existed only on the first of the month when their birthday money was due. It hurt. It hurt in a way that's hard to describe. It's not a sharp pain. It's a dull, heavy ache that sits in your chest. It's the sound of your own voice echoing in an empty house. It's realizing that the kind grandmother role I had played my whole life, the one who never complained, who always understood, who never wanted to be a burden, hadn't bought me any respect. It had only made me invisible. I spent a lot of time thinking about my legacy, not in terms of money, but in terms of me. What was I leaving behind? A house, a savings account, a few pieces of jewelry. For years, my will was a simple document, everything split evenly between my 3 children. It was fair, it was neat, it was transactional. And then, one sleepless night, about 6 months ago, I had a thought that chilled me to the bone. I thought if I were to pass away tonight, who would show up to my funeral? The answer was heartbreakingly clear. They would come for the reading of the will. They would come for the house. They would come to collect. But they wouldn't have come to see me. They hadn't come to see me in years. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to be the quiet, understanding grandmother anymore. I wasn't going to fade away into the wallpaper, waiting for scraps of their attention. If the only thing that would get them in the same room as me was the promise of money, then I was going to use that money as a key. But I was going to change the lock. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I went to my lawyer, a wonderful woman named Carol who has been handling my affairs for 20 years. She looked at me over her glasses when I explained what I wanted. She said, "Alina, this is unconventional. Are you sure you want to do this? It could cause quite a stir." And I said, "Carol, I'm an old woman sitting in an empty house. A stir is exactly what I need." I drafted a new will, a secret one. It wasn't just a list of who gets what. It was a manifesto. I called it the final distribution, but really it was a contract. I replaced the liquid assets, the cash, the easy money, with what my lawyer called eccentric legacy projects. But I called them requirements for belonging. The old will said, "My savings are divided equally." The new will said, "My savings are held in trust. They will be distributed only upon the completion of specific tasks designed to preserve the family legacy." For my eldest grandson, Michael, a software engineer who hadn't called in 2 years, his inheritance was tied to restoring my father's old wooden sailboat. It's a beautiful old thing, sitting in a garage, covered in dust. He didn't even know it existed. I wanted him to learn the history of the man it belonged to. I wanted him to get his hands dirty. For my granddaughter, Jessica, who is an art curator in the city and too busy for small-town life, her inheritance required her to curate a physical archive of our family's history. I have boxes of old letters, photographs, and recipes. I wanted her to touch them, to read them, to understand where she came from. For the younger ones, the tasks were smaller, but they required presence. One had to learn to bake my mother's apple pie recipe with me, from scratch, and then serve it at a family dinner. Another had to spend a weekend helping me organize the garden, learning the names of the flowers my husband had planted for me 50 years ago. There was no cash payout for just waiting, no check in the mail. The only way to access their future was to spend time with me, to listen to me, to work beside me. I waited until I had the final, notarized copy in my hand. I waited until the silence felt so heavy I could barely breathe. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I used leverage. I opened the group text with my children and grandchildren, the one that had been quiet for months. I typed out a simple message. No hello, no how are you? Just a picture of the new will with the notary stamp clearly visible. And I wrote, "Good afternoon, family. I have updated my final arrangements. The terms have changed significantly. I'd be happy to discuss them with anyone who wishes to visit." Then I put the phone down. I didn't have to wait long. Within 15 minutes, my phone was buzzing so hard it was vibrating off the side table. My daughter, Sarah, was the first to call. Then my son, Mark. Then texts from the grandkids. "Grandma, what does this mean? Did you really change the will? We've been meaning to come by, we were just so busy." The floodgates had opened, and I sat there in my quiet house, watching the dam break, and I felt a strange mix of power and deep, deep sorrow. Because it worked. The thing that finally made them see me wasn't my loneliness. It wasn't my love. It was a piece of paper. The next few days were a blur. For the first time in 3 years, my calendar was full. Grandkids were just passing by. They were in the neighborhood. They showed up with flowers, with pies from the grocery store, with smiles so wide they looked almost painful. Michael, who hadn't responded to a text in 2 years, drove 3 hours on a Wednesday evening just to have coffee. He sat on my couch, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. He said, "So, Grandma, this new will, what kind of changes are we talking about?" I just smiled and poured him another cup of coffee. "Oh, we'll talk about it when everyone is here. I want to explain it just once. It's a new way of doing things." I saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes. He was here for the answer, not for the coffee, but he stayed for an hour. Making small talk, looking at his watch, and I let him, because even fake attention was better than no attention. At least, that's what I told myself to get through it. We set a date for a family dinner, and to my shock, everyone said yes. Everyone. My 3 children, all 6 grandchildren. No one had a soccer game. No one was too busy. The house was full for the first time in a decade. I spent 3 days preparing. I made the roast, the potatoes, the green beans. I even tried to bake that apple pie myself, but my hands were too shaky, so I just bought one. I wanted it to feel like a celebration. I wanted to pretend it was a normal family gathering. But we all knew why we were there. You could feel it in the air. It was thick with expectation. They were polite. They hugged me, kissed my cheek, told me the house looked lovely. But their eyes kept darting to the folder I had placed by my plate. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I asked everyone to sit down. The chatter stopped immediately. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I stood up. I looked around the table at these faces I had loved since they were born. Faces I had watched sleep, faces I had wiped tears from, faces that now looked at me with a mix of nervousness and calculation. I opened the folder and pulled out the document. I said, "I want to thank you all for coming. It means more to me than you know." There were murmurs of course, Grandma, and "we love you." I let them hang in the air for a moment before I continued. "I know you're all curious about the new will," I said. "So let me explain it simply. I have decided that the money I have saved is not just money. It is a tool, and I want to use it to build something, to preserve something." I read them the clauses. I told Michael about the sailboat. I saw his face fall. He was expecting a down payment for a house, and instead, I was handing him a bucket of sandpaper and a history lesson. I told Jessica about the archive of letters. She shifted in her seat, looking at her mother, looking for a way out. I went through each one. A garden project, a baking project, a series of Sunday dinners that had to be documented, a trip to the cemetery to place flowers on graves of ancestors they couldn't name. When I finished, the silence was different than the silence I had in my empty house. This silence was heavy. It was the sound of dreams deflating. My son, Mark, was the first to speak. He tried to keep his voice calm, but I could hear the edge in it. "Mom," he said, "this is a lot. These are full-time commitments. We have jobs, we have our own families." I nodded. "I know you do, but you have to understand I have had time, years of it, and you were all too busy for a Sunday dinner. So now I'm not asking for your time. I'm requiring it. If you want the inheritance, this is the price of admission." Jessica, the art curator, finally spoke. Her voice was cool, professional. "Grandma, with all due respect, this feels a little like emotional blackmail. You're forcing us to jump through hoops for money that is rightfully ours." I looked at her, my beautiful granddaughter who had been too busy to come to my 75th birthday party. I said, "Jessica, the money is mine. It's not rightfully yours until I give it to you. And I have decided that I don't want to give it to people who don't know me, who don't know their own history, who can't be bothered to visit unless there's a legal document involved." I saw her cheeks flush. I saw my daughter-in-law, who had always been a little distant, shift uncomfortably in her seat. Then Michael let out a short laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter. He said, "So what is this, Grandma? A test? You want to see if we love you enough to sand a boat for a few months?" I looked him right in the eye. I had changed his diapers. I had taught him how to ride a bike. And now he was looking at me like I was a business adversary. I said, "Yes, Michael, I do. I want to see if you love me enough to spend time with me. Is that really such an unreasonable price for a share of my life's savings?" No one had an answer for that. The masks started to slip. The fake smiles faded. The room got quiet again, but this time it was the quiet of people who had been caught. That first dinner ended awkwardly. A few of them left quickly, making excuses. Early morning, long drive. I watched them go and my heart ached, but I didn't cry. I had done enough crying in the dark. But 3 of them stayed. Not because they wanted to, I think, but because they were too shocked to move. My youngest grandson, Leo, who was only 20 and in college, helped me with the dishes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Grandma, is the boat thing for Michael real?" I said, "It is." He thought about it. He's going to be really mad. He hates manual labor. I smiled a little. I know. Leo looked at me, and for a second I saw the little boy I used to read stories to. He said, "The garden thing, the one about learning the flowers. Can I do that one? I don't really need the money, but I'd like to learn. I don't know what Grandpa planted." My hands were in the soapy water, and I had to stop for a second to catch my breath. It was such a small thing, a simple question, but it was the first time in years one of them had asked me, about my life. I said, "Of course, Leo, I'd love that." That night, after everyone was gone, I sat in my armchair and looked at the folder. The eccentric projects weren't just a ploy. They were a sieve, and I had just watched the first few grains of sand fall through. In the months that followed, the experiment unfolded exactly as I thought it might. Some people dropped the act immediately. Michael came back once. He looked at the sailboat in the garage, took one look at the rotting wood and the tangled rigging and said, "This is a year-long project. This is insane." He left that afternoon and I haven't heard from him since. He chose the money over the work, but really, he chose the money over me, and I had to let him go. Jessica came back twice. She went through the boxes of letters. She was interested, I think, in a historical sense. She found love letters my husband wrote to me when he was stationed overseas. She held them like artifacts, but she didn't ask about the stories behind them. She didn't ask about the fear I felt or the hope. She took notes, photographed them, and left. She emailed me a few weeks later, asking if she could just have a cash equivalent instead. I told her no. She stopped coming by. But then there were the others, the ones I didn't expect. Leo, the youngest grandson, showed up every Saturday. We worked in the garden. I taught him the difference between the marigolds and the zinnias, where the lavender grew best. The story behind the rose bush my husband had planted the day I brought our first baby home from the hospital. He listened. He asked questions. He got dirt under his fingernails and didn't complain. One afternoon, we were pulling weeds, and he sat back on his heels and said, "Grandma, I never knew Grandpa. He died before I was born. But I feel like I know him now, because of this garden. I had to look away for a moment because my eyes were burning. He was getting it. He was understanding what I was trying to build. It wasn't about the money. It was about the connection. About handing down something that couldn't be spent or wasted. My granddaughter, Chloe, who had been the most distant of the younger ones, she had moved to the West Coast and acted like she was too sophisticated for our little town. She chose the baking project. She came to my kitchen once a week, and we baked my mother's apple pie. The first time, she was stiff, checking her phone every 5 minutes. She saw it as a chore. But by the third week, she left her phone in the car. We talked. Not about the will, not about the money, but about her life, her fears, her boyfriend who she wasn't sure about. We talked about my mother, who came over on a boat from Ireland with nothing but a suitcase and that pie recipe. One day, she rolled out the dough and said, "You know, this is actually really hard. I never thought about how much work went into the things you used to make for us." I said, "That's the point, sweetheart. The work is the love, you can't separate them." The confrontation at the dinner table had been the turning point. After that, the dynamic in the family shifted. The ones who were only there for the money filtered out, and the ones who stayed, well, they started to stay for reasons that had nothing to do with the folder. It was a painful process. I won't pretend it was. Watching Michael and Jessica walk away was like losing them all over again. I had to grieve the hope that they would ever care. But in their leaving, they made room for a different kind of truth. A smaller one, but a real one. My son, Mark, who had been so angry at the dinner table, came around eventually. Not for the money, he had his own career, he didn't need it. He came because he saw his own son, Leo, spending time with me. I think it made him feel guilty, or maybe it made him jealous. He started coming by on Sundays just to sit on the porch and talk. We didn't talk about the will, we talked about the past. We talked about his father, my late husband, and the silly arguments we used to have. We laughed, we cried a little, and I realized that this was what I had wanted all along. Not the grand gesture, but the Sunday afternoon. Now I am sitting here, looking at the folder, the final distribution. It did what it was meant to do. It broke the silence. It brought them into the room, but it couldn't force them to stay. That part, the part that matters most, had to come from them. So, what did I learn from all of this? Did I fix what was broken? I think I learned that a relationship jump-started by leverage can sometimes find its own engine. But it's a risk, a huge one. You have to be prepared to lose people. Because when you hold up a mirror to someone's motivations, they don't always like what they see. And sometimes, they choose to walk away rather than look. I kept the will in place for about a year. I saw who showed up. I saw who did the work. I saw Leo learn to love the garden for himself, not for a payout. I saw Chloe proudly serve her apple pie at a family gathering, her own children running around the yard. I saw the connections that were real. And eventually, I changed the will again. I went back to Carol, the lawyer. I told her I wanted to rewrite it one last time. This time, I didn't want to use the money as a weapon or a test. I split it simply. My children get a fair share. But for the grandchildren, I set up a small trust. It's not a fortune. It's enough to help with a first home or a college fund. But the distribution of that trust is not tied to sanding a boat or baking a pie anymore. It's tied to one thing, a family dinner twice a year. They don't have to be perfect dinners. They don't have to be fancy, but I have to be there. The 6 grandchildren, my 3 children and me, we have to sit around a table together and share a meal. If they do that, the money releases. If they don't, it goes to a charity that supports community gardens. Carol looked at me and said, "This is much simpler." I said, "Yes, but it's the hardest one of all, because now they have to choose to come. No strings, no projects, no tests, just a meal." The first dinner under the new rules was 2 months ago. It was just 5 of them. Michael didn't come, Jessica didn't come, and that hurt. It hurts still. I think it always will. A mother's heart doesn't stop hopping, even when she knows the truth. But the others came. We had pot roast and mashed potatoes. Leo brought flowers from the garden. Chloe brought a pie she had made herself. My son, Mark, made a toast. He said, "To Mom, for not giving up on us." I didn't cry. I had done enough crying. I just smiled and I looked at their faces. And I realized that the silence in my house was finally gone. Not because of the money, not because of the will, but because the ones who were meant to be there, the ones who chose to be there, had finally found their way back. If there's a lesson in all of this, I think it's that love is a choice. It's not something you can force, and it's not something you can buy. You can create the conditions for it. You can build a garden, you can bake a pie, you can leave a door open, but you can't make someone walk through it. Some people will see the work and run, and you have to let them. You have to let them go with love, even when it breaks your heart. But other people will pick up a shovel. They'll roll out the dough. They'll sit on the porch and listen to your old stories. And those are the ones who matter. Those are the ones who are building a legacy with you, not waiting for you to leave so they can collect it. I used my will to break the silence, and for a while I thought that was a terrible thing to do. I thought I had stooped to their level. But now I think I just made the terms clear. I said, "This is what matters to me. Show me what matters to you." And in the end, I got my answer. It wasn't the answer I wanted from all of them, but it was the truth. And living in the truth, even a painful one, is so much better than living in the silence. So now I sit in my house and the phone rings. Not every day, but enough. The garden is blooming. The pie recipe is being passed down. And the will, the one that started all this, is tucked away in a drawer, waiting for a time that I hope is still many years away. I don't know what will happen when I'm gone. I hope they'll remember the meals. I hope they'll remember the garden. I hope they'll remember that I loved them enough to demand more than just their presence at a reading of a will. I demanded their hearts. And while not all of them were willing to give it, the ones who did, well, they made the silence worth breaking.